This is a special one-hour edition of the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite and Marvin Kalb in Washington, Roger Mudd in Washington, George Herman in Washington, Neil Strauser in Washington, Eddie Barker in Dallas, Dan Rather in Dallas, Lou Wood in Fort Worth, and Harry Reasoner at the New York Stock Exchange.
Good evening. There is only, of course, really one story this evening, and in this special one-hour report, we will bring you the moving and impressive highlights of John Fitzgerald Kennedy's final journey. We'll return to the city where the great tragedy began, for scenes of final tribute to another of last Friday's victims, and for a report on a community determined to rebuild a shattered image. We'll also have reports on the stepped-up investigation into the president's assassination, on the immediate plans of the Kennedy family, on our new president's first steps toward a possible summit meeting, and the return of Congress to its legislative burdens. Throughout this country and the world today, there were countless expressions of mourning and tribute to our late president. They reflected and echoed in their own way the solemn ceremonies in Washington, where more than 1 million assembled, including an unprecedented array of world statesmen, to pay final respects to President Kennedy. That ceremony began in the great rotunda of the Capitol.
I got my credentials and I'll proceed right out to the cemetery.
And then, to the thud of boots and the dirge of drums, the procession began. Up Pennsylvania Avenue to the White House, the route a new president rode in triumph not quite 3 years ago. A brief stop at the White House, then Mrs. Kennedy followed the casket on foot to St. Matthew's Church.
And then in cars, the first of the dignitaries. And then, marching along behind, come the heads of state, in no particular formation, just walking ad lib, and members of the White House staff, people from the White House grounds here, some of them falling into the procession to join the walk to the church.
After the services, back into the cars.
Senator Edward Kennedy now going over and inviting former President Eisenhower to speak with Mrs. Kennedy, who was still in the first car. And President Truman there as well. It appears as though both former presidents are once again paying their respects to Mrs. Kennedy.
Then the final mile to Arlington National Cemetery.
Oh, I see. I'm not going to use that way.
The president's old friend, Cardinal Cushing of Boston, conducting the service, waits at graveside for 21 guns to begin their salute.
Requiem aeternam Done Domine et lux perpetua luceat. Rest in peace. Eternal rest grant unto him, O Lord. May his soul and the souls of all the faithfully departed through the mercy of God rest in peace. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost, amen. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Eternal rest grant unto him, O Lord. May his soul and the souls of all the faithful departed through the mercy of God rest in peace. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen. name of the Lord who made heaven and earth. The Lord be with you and with your spirit. Let us pray. O God, by whose word all things are made holy, pour down thy blessing on this light which thou hast created, and grant that whoever giving thanks to thee uses it in accordance with thy law and thy will, may by calling upon thy holy name receive to thy aid, health of body, and protection of soul, and grace to follow in the way of the wonderful man whom we bury here today. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen.
For Dallas, where the assassin's bullet was fired, the shock, the grief, and the mourning have been compounded. Eddie Barker, news director of KRLD-TV, reports.
The president is buried now, and Dallas, Texas, where John F. Kennedy died, mourns his passing. The sorrow of Dallas in 1963 duplicates the sorrow in Washington in 1865 when Lincoln was shot, and again in 1881 when Garfield was assassinated, and Buffalo when McKinley died at the turn of the century. Dallas closed its doors today, and its people talked of what has happened and why.
Well, no, I'm not ashamed of Dallas. I think Dallas is a great town. I'm sorry it had to happen here, but I know that everybody pulling together, well, we'll eventually get over it here.
Said many times before, I think we've lost a rather great leader. Many people were against him, many people were for him. But all in all, if so many people were against him, we vote people out of office. We don't shoot them.
I still can't believe it. My wife and I just look at each other from time to time and say we just still can't believe it. But we have both vowed, and as we hope others will too, that we will be better Christians, Americans, and people as a result of this great sacrifice.
It's still hard to believe that there'd be people in the United States or even the world who would do a dastardly thing such as this. I feel like that everything happens for the best, and we can all join together and just pray to God that this will awaken this country to the dangers that are encountered in this communistic ways, and just hope that we can overcome this without too much damage or to our prestige throughout the world.
Well, we're all real shocked, and we just couldn't believe that anything could happen like this. We're all real sorry. It's just terrible that anything like this could happen.
I just couldn't believe it happened here in Dallas. I just hope people just don't blame us for it, because Dallas didn't want it to happen.
Young man like that getting killed, besides another policeman. 5 kids. What they gonna do now? They got something to do. Somebody's got to do something for him. Of course, he's all right. How about this policeman out here? That's who I've been thinking about all night. Why a man would go ahead and kill a man like that, just out of cold blood? What are we coming to? I don't believe Dallas is his fault, but we get to blame for it. See, that's the question about it. I don't believe the people of Dallas hated the administration that bad. Some of them might differ with him in his opinion. Naturally, that's so. With all presidents, you have a difference of opinion, but not bad enough to murder. As a matter of fact, I couldn't see him spitting on Mr. Stevenson either. I believe all this stuff is cooked up. Out for me. I don't believe that's a Dallasite stuff. I just don't believe it.
I don't see how anyone could have caused this terrible heartbreak in our city. It just makes you ashamed that you live here. That's all I can say.
I think that the whole world should not frown upon Dallas. As such, we should frown upon ourselves as a nation for such an occurrence.
Well, just like everyone else, I guess. It's just a sad thing, you know, to happen. I work right across the street from where it happened. And I just said the United States was such a big place for the president to come right to our door to get killed. You know, I just feel like everyone else does. I think it's terrible.
But a lifelong Republican, that makes no difference. A real great man is gone, and we're all going to suffer for it. We all should. I just hope that his going helps us to realize what sort of thing we have let ourselves fall into, the way we have become, and I hope from this we can take a new birth and realize that we're letting hate undermine us and become too much a part of our life.
Dallas today had even more to mourn. It held funeral services for one of its own who was a victim of Friday's tragedy, Officer J.D. Tippit, fatally wounded, attempting to arrest the alleged assassin in his flight. Bill Mercer of KRLD-TV reports.
The Commander-in-Chief of the United States, and here Officer Tippit, and the suspect for both those killings have all died. And filing past the casket of Officer J.D. Tippit, the many friends, some who knew him, but all in Dallas and the nation know of him for his unselfish, his personal contribution in the line of duty. This has been one continuous day of memorial services. Starting at shortly after 9 o'clock Dallas time in Washington, D.C., with the services for President Kennedy. And almost immediately upon his burial at Arlington Cemetery, the services for the man who died approximately 1.5 miles away, Officer J.D. Tippit.
Officer Tippit left a 39-year-old widow and 3 small children. The accused assassin of the president and slayer of Officer Tippit, 24-year-old Lee Harvey Oswald, also went to his grave today in a secret, almost unattended funeral at Fort Worth. Lou Wood has that story.
With police guarding the casket, the body of Lee Harvey Oswald was carried from the rear door of a Fort Worth funeral home early this afternoon. It was a wooden coffin with a single spray of flowers on top, destined for a simple burial in Rose Hill Cemetery. Their officers kept the curious away. With newsmen serving as pallbearers, the coffin rested for a time in a small brownstone chapel, then was moved to the grave site. The family arrived, and only the family. Oswald's wife, Marina, born in Russia 22 years ago, wearing a simple black dress, accompanied by one of her small children. Next, Oswald's mother, with another infant. Then a brother joined them under a canvas canopy where they sat while a minister of the Fort Worth Council of Churches conducted a short burial service. With newsmen out of range, Marina Oswald stepped forward, tearfully kissed the body of her husband. The casket was closed, and the remains of the accused assassin of President Kennedy were lowered into the ground. This is Lou Wood reporting.
Newsmen served as pallbearers because there were not enough others there to do the job. Correspondent Dan Rather was permitted today to see some films of the actual assassination, and here's his report from Dallas.
The films we saw were taken by an amateur photographer who had a particularly good vantage point just past the building from which the fatal shot was fired. The films show President Kennedy's open black limousine making a left turn off Houston Street onto Elm Street on the fringe of downtown Dallas. The left turn made just below the window in which the assassin was waiting. About 35 yards past the very base of the building, just below the window, President Kennedy could be seen to put his right hand up to the side of his head to either brush back his hair or perhaps rub his eyebrow. President Kennedy was sitting on the same side of the car as the building from which the shot came. Mrs. Kennedy was by his side. In the jump seat in front of them, Mrs. Connolly and Governor Connolly. Governor Connolly on the same side of the car as the president, and in the front seat, 2 Secret Service men. Just as the president put that right hand up to the side of his head, you could see him lurch forward. The first shot had hit him. Mrs. Kennedy was looking in another direction and apparently didn't see or sense that first shot or didn't hear it. But Governor Connolly in the seat in front appeared to have heard it, or at least sensed that something was wrong. The governor's coat was open. He reached back in this fashion, exposing his white shirt front to the assassin's window. He reached back as if to offer aid or ask the president something. At that moment, a shot clearly hit the governor in the front, and he fell back in the seat. Mrs. Connolly immediately threw herself over him in a protective position. In the next instant, with this time Mrs. Kennedy apparently looking on, a second shot, the third total shot, hit the president's head. His head could be seen to move violently forward. And Mrs. Kennedy stood up immediately. The president leaned over her way. It appeared that he might have brushed her legs. Mrs. Kennedy then literally went on the top of the trunk of the Lincoln car, put practically her whole body on the trunk. It appeared she might have been on her all fours there, reaching out for the Secret Service man, the lone Secret Service man who was riding on the bumper of the car, the back bumper on Mrs. Kennedy's side. The Secret Service man leaned forward and put his hands on Mrs. Kennedy's shoulder to push her back into the car. She was in some danger, it appeared, of rolling off or falling off. When we described this before, there was some question about what we meant by Mrs. Kennedy being on the trunk of the car. Only she knows, but it appeared that she was trying desperately to get the Secret Service man's attention, or perhaps to help pull him into the car. The car never stopped, it never paused. In the front seat, a Secret Service man was on the telephone. The car picked up speed and disappeared beneath an underpass. This is Dan Rather in Dallas.
The White House tonight announced a full investigation into the assassination of President Kennedy. Under orders from President Johnson, all federal agencies have been advised to cooperate with the FBI. The results of their investigation will be made public. As Lee Harvey Oswald was buried today, Dallas District Attorney Henry Wade acknowledged reports that a map had been found in Oswald's room, a map that had cross marks at various points along President Kennedy's parade route and a line that matched the path of the fatal bullet. A Mexico City newspaper today reported that Oswald had made a trip to Mexico City in late September and had tried, but failed, to get a visa to Russia via Cuba. Jack Ruby, the man accused of shooting Oswald, was transferred secretly from the Dallas City Jail to County Jail today. That's the trip that Oswald started but never finished. Ruby's attorney said today his client must have been temporarily insane, thus apparently setting the stage for Ruby's trial. District Attorney Wade will ask a grand jury to indict Ruby for murder with malice, the equivalent of first-degree murder in Texas. The trial, expected sometime in January, would center on the issue of temporary insanity. If Ruby's defense can prove that to the jury, Ruby could go free. If the prosecution can prove its murder with malice case, that same jury could assess the death penalty. Tonight's White House announcement of a federal investigation into the circumstances surrounding the assassination was the second investigation announced today. In Washington, Neil Strasser reports.
There can never be a trial of Lee Harvey Oswald to prove beyond that legal shadow of a doubt whether he was the assassin of President Kennedy. A second assassin's bullet took care of that. But it is considered highly important here in Washington to place on the record in unimpeachable fashion all the evidence that might help to lift that shadow. President Johnson tonight has chosen the Justice Department and the almost never questioned FBI to make that inquiry, so that not only the American people can know, but to provide an official answer to the current Soviet line that the assassination is being used in some sort of reactionary plot to hit at communism. There are other investigations. Congressman Hale Boggs today suggested a blue-ribbon bipartisan congressional inquiry into the circumstances surrounding the assassination of President Kennedy. And moments after the funeral ended this afternoon, the Attorney General of the state of Texas, Wagner Carr, summoned reporters to a Washington hotel for an announcement, said Carr, of national significance.
All Texans join with all other Americans in mourning the loss of our president. Because the shocking assassination of President Kennedy, the attempted assassination of Governor Connally, and the subsequent murder of the suspected assassin occurred in Texas, it is my feeling that all the facts surrounding these matters should be made public for the knowledge of all people everywhere. I will therefore, upon my return to Texas, call for a court of inquiry which is authorized under existing Texas law. Those conducting the inquiry will be the top staff of my office, staff, S-T-A-F-F, of my office, including the Attorney General, working in cooperation with one or more outstanding and eminent jurists and lawyers. Also, top-level local and state authorities will be invited to participate actively, and federal authorities will be asked to cooperate. A full and complete report of the findings of this hearing will be sent to the United States Department of Justice. And I want to emphasize that this will be a thorough, complete, and impartial investigation, and that the full results will be made public. Further details will be announced as they develop, and I must go now to the plane to return to Texas to put these plans into operation.
The Court of Inquiry announced by the Attorney General of Texas will have the power to subpoena witnesses. The Justice Department said it will furnish all assistance available. But shortly after that announcement, there came the announcement that the President has directed a separate federal investigation too, every shred of evidence to be examined. It is interesting to note that today Congressman Ayers of Ohio said he will introduce a bill in Congress making an assault on a president, vice president, or cabinet officer a federal crime. It is not now. The killing of President Kennedy was murder under state law. That is why the accused assassin, Oswald, was in the custody of Dallas police at the time of his own shooting. From the feeling I have encountered in certain federal agencies in the past couple of days, it appears there might be considerable support for the sort of measure that Ayers today has proposed. This is Neil Strasser in Washington.
Investigations into all the facts of these last 4 days may not be limited to the state of Texas or the FBI. Some congressmen already have suggested a congressional investigation. The city of Dallas, whatever may come, faces a monumental job of rebuilding its image, trying to find some way of living with the fact that the darkest days in the recent history of this nation were played out on its streets. Ed Barker, news director for station KRLD in Dallas, gathered together a group of citizens to discuss the problem.
Walter, the civic and spiritual leaders of this city, whose job it is going to be to forge the path that lies ahead, took time today to reflect on what has happened since that Friday and recall the dreams of civic pride that were shattered with the sharp crack of a sniper's rifle. First, here's Luther Holcomb, head of the citywide Council of Churches.
The mayor of Dallas issued a proclamation calling for a prayer vigil. It was my sacred privilege to notify the ministers of the city. Their response was immediate. I would say during a 24-hour period, more individuals turned to places of worship, chapels, all types of churches in Dallas than any time since D-Day.
Eric Johnson, civic leader who was to have introduced President Kennedy at that luncheon that never came about.
Had three organizations, however, that had a particular part to play here, and I've brought with me some of the material that will be reminiscent of what we intended to do, because this might be of interest to you, Eddie. When the President arrived to the music of Hail the Chief, we'd have had an invocation and then a little food, after which we'd have introduced our distinguished head table, numbered the guests I've mentioned, as well as our own mayor, the president of the Dallas Assembly, and the president of the Science Research Center. We then, having introduced our congressman friends, would have gone on to ask particularly for Mrs. Kennedy to join me at the microphone. We had thought for some time of how we could make some little gift to her or to the president that would not be, let's say, presumptuous in any way, but in keeping with our welcoming idea. And it seemed to us most appropriate, since they were people who had all the worldly things they could want, to
make a gift to the children. We therefore had selected a couple of saddles for the ponies that the children we knew would enjoy. And following display of gift wrap packages enclosing these saddles, we had a memento of a previous visit of another president, which we thought particularly fitting for a nonpartisan organization to present to Mrs. Kennedy as what I think would be called the memorabilia associated with both this visit and a prior one by a Republican president in 1909. President William Taft was here then and was tendered a banquet in his honor by the citizens of the city at the then Oriental Hotel. And it seemed to me that it was particularly appropriate that this included a sheet with a picture of the president who who was quoted in the closing of an Atlanta speech, the final line of which said in part, I am not so much hopeful of winning the South over, as they say, but the South has succeeded in winning me. And we thought that since it was a nonpartisan party, it would be nice to point out that a Democratic city then had welcomed a Republican president, and we, with a slightly Republican tinge in our time, hope to make Mr. and Mrs. Kennedy just as welcome here.
Rabbi Hillel Silverman, a leader of his faith in the community.
This is the saddest day, I feel, in American history. I've just come back from my synagogue. There were 2,000 people there. It was the saddest, the most tragic memorial service that I have ever in my life conducted. Let me talk to you for just a moment about our city of Dallas. Naturally, all of our citizenry are stunned and shocked and numb in disbelief. However, let me say this about our city of Dallas, and if I may add a personal note, I have lived all over the world. I was born and raised in Connecticut. I saw duty with the Marine Corps in South Carolina. I was stationed overseas. I've lived in Florida, visited every single state in this union for the last 10 years. I've been living in Dallas, and I have found no better and no greater city in this entire country. The preponderant majority of citizens in Dallas are God-fearing, responsible, sensitive, decent, mature citizens who are building together a very, very great community of people. There are wonderful relationships existent in this city of Dallas. There is no prejudice whatsoever. The minorities in Dallas, and I mean the minorities, members of my faith, the Jewish faith, and the Negroes and the Catholics, are all active in the community, are all God-fearing citizens working together in harmony and in unity and in brotherhood and peace. And we are saddened that just a few on the idiotic fringe have caused this terrible thing to happen to the American people.
C.A. Tatum, businessman, civic leader, native Dallasite.
Well, my heart is heavy, and I know the heart of every citizen of Dallas is heavy. We carry the grief as if we'd lost a member of our own family, actually. Dallas had prepared so carefully and so well, and actually with great pleasure and joy, for the visit of the president. And when this tragedy occurred, it, of course, came as a great shock to all of us. I've lived here all my life, and this is a great city and a good city. And it's been good to me, and I feel strongly about it, Eddie. This city is good, and by being good, it will carry on. And it will rise above this, because it has that innate goodness which will enable it to do so.
The Reverend Ernest Estelle, clergyman and leader of the Negro community.
Every segment of our community is deeply shocked
and grieved at the untimely death of our beloved president. Dallas is a good city, one of the best cities in the United States. But we have sat idly by and allowed hate groups to take charge of our city in this instance, and they have marred and distorted the true image of Dallas. Responsibility for the tragic death of our beloved president must be shared equally by every adult citizen of the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Our tolerance of and calculated indifference towards frightfully large number of hate groups we feel to be directly responsible for the death of our president. President Kennedy, a young man, the only man to enter the White House who boldly made the Christian religion his most pronounced characteristic. I've just left the St. John Baptist Church, where 2,000 people have crowded in to pay this memorial tribute to our late and lamented president. And we in Dallas feel keenly the shock that have come to this city and subsequent events that have placed us before the world in such an unfavorable light. But Dallas is a good city, and the acts of these criminal groups in no way reflect the true spirit of the city of Dallas.
Father Oscar Huber, the priest who administered the last rites to the slain president.
It was a reaction of sadness. It was really shown on the face of practically everyone. I had many people coming up to me and expressing their sorrow at what had happened, and some were in tears in doing so. And we had an increase, I think, in attendance today, and certainly an increase in Holy Communions. And on Friday evening, the day of the unfortunate incident, I said a Mass at 5:30. We have a daily Mass at 5:30 in the evening. And very few people knew that I was going to offer that Mass for the repose of the soul of the president, yet the church was crowded that evening. I'd say twice as many people as usual in the church that evening. And there was noticeably sorrow on the faces of practically everyone.
Robert Cullum, business leader and president of the powerful Dallas Chamber of Commerce.
Eddie, I'm sure that there is some confusion in the minds of people from other cities, and the picture that they get of Dallas these days. I think perhaps that the true picture is, as well as anything I know, was reflected in the work of preparation for the president's visit to Dallas. I hark back to this. I, like all citizens of Dallas, tend to be preoccupied with it. Our minds are on it. But I was involved in arrangements for the luncheon with Eric and with literally hundreds of anonymous workers. And as I think you know from having been around here a long time, this is perhaps the trademark of the civic spirit of Dallas, is the anonymity with which people work and the responsiveness with which they answer every call. And in this project, which the city was so engrossed in and so eager in its anticipation for a fine success, I've never participated in anything with which people worked harder or really, ironically enough, with a greater sense of impending success, and everything crowned their efforts so beautifully. The airport reception was magnificent. Another irony was that I met my friend John Connolly, the governor there, and said, John, you're going to be proud of Dallas today. We have a great show for you. I think you were on the streets downtown and you saw the warmth and the obvious, the tremendous eagerness with which the up and down the street rank and file citizens of Dallas greeted our government, because the heart of our government was here, as Eric so well put it. We were within 5 minutes at that tragic end of perhaps the finest civic triumph that Dallas ever knew.
5 minutes from the greatest civic triumph this city ever knew. But those 5 minutes now seem like an eternity. In that eternity, how can Dallas offer its true portrait to the nation or to the world on this day in the midst of national sorrow that was born of the tragedy here? How can the city penetrate the darkening shadows of criticism from those who see in the assassination of John F. Kennedy the guilt of this city? How can it express its grief? And in expressing it, assure the world that violence is not a natural phase of this city's life and being. But if there is guilt by association, then these are the outward manifestations of that guilt. The wreaths that lay near the place where the late president was shot. It's Monday now, and since that dark Friday when the canyons of this city became the valley of death for John F. Kennedy, the heart of Dallas has been cloaked in a shroud. The crowds still come, as though trying to communicate something of their terrible agony. They are Dallas, but in their agony, they are the nation. They are leaders and followers, and their outward grief speaks for them in a way far stronger than mere words. Had the assassin of the president lived in another place, or had the crime happened at another time, Dallas would grieve as it grieves now, not because it happened here, but because it happened at all. Now back to Walter Cronkite in New York.
Dallas's shame is the nation's and civilization's shame. Even as Dallas begins the job of rebuilding its own self-esteem, the nation turns to the job of rebuilding its image in the eyes of the world. In Washington, the presence of so many heads of state, premiers, foreign and defense ministers presented a unique opportunity to President Johnson. Representatives of 53 countries came to honor President Kennedy. There were 26 presidents and heads of state, 30 foreign ministers, and 5 defense ministers. President Johnson is taking the occasion to confer privately with some of the foreign leaders informally tonight and tomorrow. He met Charles de Gaulle tonight. All the visiting delegations had a chance, though, to meet the new American president at a State Department reception early this evening. Our Marvin Kalb was there.
President Johnson did get down to diplomatic business tonight, greeting, among many other heads of delegations, 92 of them in all, who had come to pay their respects to the late President John F. Kennedy, greeting here the head of the Soviet delegation, Premier Khrushchev's own personal envoy, First Deputy Premier Anastas Mikoyan. Tomorrow, it is believed, the President will have a 15 or 20-minute conversation with Mikoyan, who was last here almost exactly a year ago to iron out some of the details of that Cuban Missile Crisis. Soviet-American relations lie, of course, at the core of American foreign policy, for, in a sense, as these go, so go many other avenues of agreements, potential and otherwise, accommodations and understandings. Some people at this government reception at the State Department felt that possibly President Johnson could have waited until tomorrow for this reception, but most American officials were pleased on balance that he chose quickly and amiably to reestablish diplomatic links between the United States and allies, friends, and foes around the world. Also, they added many leaders, such as French President de Gaulle, plan to leave tonight. The major theme at this reception, the point that the President was trying to make, was the basic continuity of American foreign policy as practiced under the late President John F. Kennedy. Basic continuity. State Department sources stress, and they seem to hit the word basic very hard, implying that possibly minor changes in emphasis and nuance might now be expected under a new president. But unity of the Western world is the key to Johnson's policy, just as it was the key to the late president's, beefing up America's military strength, strengthening, too, the alliance between the United States and Western Europe, strengthening the ties with Latin America and with Africa and Asian leaders as well. Johnson tonight was his old political self, shaking hands warmly with each dignitary, listening as they expressed, often at great length, their sorrow at the assassination of President Kennedy and their very best wishes to his, Johnson's, new administration. Sometimes he would shake hands with both hands. At other times, obviously depending on who the dignitary was, he would shake hands simply, with dignity, and a sense almost of aloofness, as he listened to their expressions of condolences. He shook hands with almost all of the delegates, 92 heads of delegations, then had brief conversations with the heads of 15 delegations, then ducked downstairs. This reception was on the 8th floor at the State Department, downstairs to the 7th to Secretary Rusk's room for 3 20-minute talks, the first with French President de Gaulle, then Japan's Prime Minister Ikeda, then Canada's Prime Minister Lester Pearson. Almost at every spare moment, he would turn around for a brief chat with his Secretary of State, the man on whom he will have to lean most heavily in the early months of his administration until he learns the nuclear intricacies of American foreign policy, lean on Rusk's guidance and advice. Quickly, very quickly, since Friday, a very close relationship has been established between Secretary Rusk, the State Department, and the White House under President Johnson. This is Marvin Kalb in Washington.
President Johnson also was wasting no time in getting the domestic affairs of government back into high gear. Tonight he called his top economic advisors in for a meeting tonight. The President, Treasury Secretary Dillon, Budget Director Kermit Gordon, and Walter Heller, the Chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors, are expected to discuss the budget the President sends to Congress in January, as well as the current state of the economy. Governor Rockefeller of New York said today that he will not push his candidacy for the Republican presidential nomination during the 30-day period of mourning he has declared in New York State. And Republican Senator Goldwater proposed a moratorium on all political speeches until the 1st of next year to give, as he said, President Johnson all the room he needs to operate. The assassination of the president struck Congress at a vital crossroads. The end of a session was fast approaching. The bulk of the important administration bills were still pending. What now? For a look ahead, this report from Roger Mudd in Washington.
The first session of the 88th Congress is now over for all intents and purposes. Aside from the routine but vital appropriations measures, the major issues before the Congress cannot possibly be disposed of in the time remaining. Wednesday, after the new president's address to the joint session, the Congress leaves until Tuesday for a Thanksgiving recess, comes back briefly, and then goes again for Christmas. This long holiday break will give President Johnson time to formulate his legislative policies, some hint of which is looked for in his Wednesday speech. Today, the Senate and the House met briefly to hear eulogies to the late president and to hear Senate Majority Leader Mansfield predict that John Kennedy's death will become a source of strength for Congress to forge a new decency at home and a reasoned peace at home. But as heavy as the congressional grief was today, there was some slight legislative movement. The Senate Banking Committee, on an 8-7 vote, recommended against passage of the Munt bill that would prohibit government underwriting of private loans for the communist bloc wheat sale. Last week, before the assassination, the committee favored the bill 9-6. There are 2 other congressional items we would add this evening. First, during the Senate eulogies today, Republican Margaret Chase Smith of Maine quietly walked over to the old desk of Senator John Kennedy and placed on it a single rose. And second, the publicity photographers for Democratic and Republican campaign staffs confirmed they have been taking pictures of senators paying homage at the casket of the late president. They denied the pictures would be used for political purposes. This is Roger Mudd in Washington.
Congress and the nation had reminders today that while the world seemed suspended by our tragedy, it really kept on its whirling way. In Vietnam, reports today of the bloodiest fighting in almost a year. Military sources report massive communist attacks have wiped out 2 strategic northern hamlets, and more than 1,000 mountain tribesmen defending them are now missing. Communist guerrillas have stepped up their attacks against the hamlets ever since the overthrow of President Diem. Fighting was widespread over the weekend. 2 American Air Force officers were killed in a plane crash, and on the ground, 4 of our Army men are reported missing and presumed captured. The South Vietnamese government reported that its troops have killed 82 communist guerrillas in a battle just 45 miles south of the capital of Saigon. Neighboring Cambodia, which has renounced American aid, signed a commercial air agreement today with Red China, and the new China news agency says Cambodia has accepted Peking's promise of support in case of attack. Terrorists took no break in Venezuela. 4 persons were reported killed today in widespread outbreaks of pro-Castro terrorism, and 6 oil and gas pipelines were set afire. In Lawrence, Massachusetts, police said today they're afraid a 23-year-old single girl whose body was discovered Sunday is the 10th victim in 17 months for Boston's mystery strangler. Police said they have something to go on, as they put it, but have not made any arrests as yet. In the world of finance, life must go on, too. Friday's tragic news sent stock exchange prices tumbling. The Dow Jones average dropped 21 points, but the market was closed early then, and with the weekend and today's day of mourning, plus indications of stability on foreign exchanges, which were open today, there is optimism about tomorrow when the exchanges here reopen. Here is Harry Reasoner at the New York Stock Exchange.
Tomorrow, this famous room, which is now so dim and quiet, will be bright and busy again as the New York Stock Exchange opens for business after 3 days. The question is, which turn will that business take? On Friday, after the tragic news from Dallas, the stock exchange had to close an hour and 23 minutes early, with the Dow Jones averages down about 21 points, and with such a torrent of sell orders in brokers' hands that the ticker was running behind 27 minutes. The question is, what will stock owners who have had a weekend to reflect, just as the rest of the country has, on what happens next, what will they do tomorrow? One theory is that the people who buy and sell stocks, like the rest of the country, have decided, as they got used to the tragic event, that the country and the government will go on, and that there will probably be no major change in basic policies. There's some evidence to support this theory. When the exchange closed on Friday, there were a great many sell orders in brokers' hands to be executed on the next day of business. Over the weekend, a good many of those have been canceled, and a good many buy orders have replaced them, as some people decided that a lot of stocks were selling at a low price and it was time to buy them. As a matter of fact, the evidence is that buy orders are running at a ratio of about 6 to 1 to sell orders. This means it'll be a busy morning, and even though the orders are limited, that is, they call for buying a stock providing it does not go above a certain price, the chances are that the market will initially go up. After that, the experts say you can't tell what will happen except that there will be large volume. They like to cite what J.P. Morgan said when asked what the market was going to do. He said it will fluctuate. This is Harry Reasoner at the New York Stock Exchange.
Incidentally, there was a major shift of leadership at the Studebaker Corporation today. Sherwood Egbert, resigned as the president of Studebaker. He said he had some differences of opinion.